Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. And today I'm continuing my conversation with my podcast friend Jacob Rennaker. We've just been looking at the fantasy universes, and now we're going to go and look at the 1990s and pick out the top 3 reads from the 1990s, with the idea of treading backwards through the 20th century and picking out highlights from each decade. So, Jacob, I was doing a quick survey of the 1990s, but before I tell you what were the main fantasy books of that era, what were you doing in the 1990s?
1990s, I was firmly in middle school, junior high, high school. That was my formative adolescence, coming to terms with myself and the world, trying to evade the eye of adults, and yes, trying to do something. I won't say meaningful, trying to do something entertaining and leaving my mark on the world, burning myself out.
So for me, the 1990s was a very interesting decade. So I had left college. I'm a bit older than you, as you can tell. I'd left college in 1990 and I joined the British Diplomatic Service. And so I spent 3 years living in Poland. I also got married. And when I came home in 1995, I then did a doctorate at Oxford University. And during the course of that doctorate, which finished in 2000, I had 2 of my 3 children. So I was moving into young parenthood time. So for me, probably less time to read fantasy, but I was aware of what was going on as a sort of person who loves literature. And certainly I have read quite a lot of the titles that came out in the 90s, in the 2000s, when I was, reading to kids or reading for my own pleasure, or starting to learn, starting my career as a writer, which began in 2006. So for me, that's where I was. Okay, shall I tell you what were the sort of, big titles of the 1990s? Some you can probably guess if you're doing your tick list. Obviously, we've got Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which came out in 1997. For Americans, that is Harry Potter and the Magician's Stone, I think, isn't it? Something like that. Different title.
It is.
Different title in the States. Philosopher's Stone is natural philosophy, the idea of that, that's why she's called it that. What do I have to say? Not much. Everyone knows Harry Potter. So that came out in 1997. The other sort of big title, again from the UK in that era, was the beginning of the Northern Lights series by Philip Pullman, his Dark Materials. Again, I think there may be a different title in America.
Yes, Golden Compass. Yeah, so Harry Potter was the Sorcerer's Stone, and then the Northern Lights is the Golden Compass.
Yeah. But the Northern Lights is the first of that, and that came out in 1995, just a couple of years before. And then also in the children's, or we're moving into YA, one book which I'd like to sort of mention is the Sabriel book by Garth. I couldn't find Sabriel. I have it, but I think someone's borrowed it. So I found the other 2 books in the series. That's Garth Nix, who's Australian. So shout out to Australia. And then we've got, so that's Sabriel is 1995, and the other parts of the series are in the early 2000s. Then we've got, I thought I should mention, we've got Wicked, Gregory Maguire in 1995. I mentioned it mainly because it's such a huge fantasy title now. Probably a bit of a slow burn, that one. And then we've also got the beginning of the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series. I've got here The Eye of the World. I've not read these, so I have a son and a husband who have, and I look at the all 100 volumes of them. They're all this thick. I think, I don't know. So, so that's the kind of landscape. We've got real big hitters, some of which have become, films or TV series or whatever. So, have I missed any major titles off? That, I mean, maybe different from the ones you like, but in terms of the big hitters, have I missed anybody?
Yeah, you've missed Game of Thrones,
Did that
George R. R.
begin?
Martin.
Did that
Yeah,
begin in the 90s? Oh,
yeah,
I didn't even bother
began
to
in the
check.
90s. Yeah, it's that early. Yeah, yeah. So while maybe didn't have, obviously the television series is what launched it into public consciousness and kind of global fame. But that began there in the 90s. So
Have you got a
humble.
date for that?
Oh,
Don't worry.
should.
But
I don't have the date on it. But 96, sorry, 96. Yes, I do have the date. 1996. So mid 90s. Yeah, there's also you have and not in terms of like series, but books that's Terry Pratchett's Good Omens is one that a standalone, but right, one that has certainly in terms of fantasy landscape, that's kind of your comedic, satirical, classic Terry Pratchett.
It's Neil Gaiman, isn't it, as well?
Yes, yeah.
And that's a 90s title, is it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
yeah,
funny
so
because I'd have put it later. I'd have put it in the 2000s. But there you go. You learn something every day. So thank you. Anything else that I've missed?
Those are those are the biggest ones. I mean, I wanted to put since we didn't have the 2000s on there. I wanted to pull the Dresden Files, Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. It was published in 2000. It's technically written in the late 90s.
No. The rule
So if
is
these are
1999 is your cutoff.
Cut off, then I can't include Dresden Files. So you have so later you don't have that's where you have kind of urban fantasy is kind of like picking up there. So you don't quite have
sorry,
as
2000s,
hard of a there.
Can't talk
it's
about
too bad, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. The other one I did wonder about mentioning is Robin Hobb, the Assassin's Apprentice, as well.
Right. Yeah.
So there we go.
It's also another one of those. If you want Ella Enchanted, if for like children's books are more there, but those are kind of the heavy hitters.
Okay, so we're going to have a top three. Perhaps starting with your third on your list rather than your top one. So what are you going to pitch to me, Jacob, as your top three? I think in terms of best, we need to
best. Yeah, that needs to define. Yeah, so when you're saying here, in terms of these, what are you?
I'm not talking about best-selling. Let's get that out of the way. I'm defining this as the book you go back to read with pleasure. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you go back to it happily. And perhaps it's changed or shifted your ideas about what fantasy could do.
Yeah.
I think you feel if it's sci-fi, feel free to include it. If it's in that sort of more sci-fi-ish world.
Right.
So it's got to be a reading for pleasure thing, because obviously what is best is such a subjective. It's like when they give the Oscar for the best film. You always think, well, what does that mean?
That wasn't the best,
So what do you go back to and actually enjoy? So what's your number 3 on your list?
Of 3, I'd have to do, I don't know if personally, and not the impact that they had, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at, it is rather more limited, I suppose, because like I mentioned in our last conversation about Star Wars, that was when the 90s, mid 90s, there'd been a drought for Star Wars content for a long time, for probably a decade or so. And they finally released a set of stories, a trilogy of novels that were sequel novels that took place 20 years after the original films, called Heir to the Empire. And it's no longer canonical in the Disney kind of reset, and they're kind of canonification of of what is considered Star Wars, but they are borrowing freely from characters and parts of this that they're putting now into it. Anyway, so those were ones that in the mid-90s, that those were the ones that I would go back to because I had such, I mentioned before, this nostalgia for this world of Star Wars, and
So was that a
characters
named writer or something appearing out of the studio?
It was Timothy Zahn. Yeah. So he was a science fiction author. So for me, that was where my 90s, like what I was most excited about. And then like in 99, they took actually Terry Brooks, Sword of Shannara, fantasy author, like well known in the Tolkienian kind of vein. There, he was tapped to write the novelization of the first Star Wars prequel. So it was published in 1999, The Phantom Menace, and that one was surprisingly good because it was taking somebody who had writing chops, like fantasy writing chops, and see what they did with the script and what happened with on film. So it's almost kind of a separate entity in terms of its flavor and character exploration. And for me, fantasy, the parts that I enjoy most about Star Wars are the fantastical elements, and less so the technology. Just because I'm more fantasy oriented by temperament, probably because I didn't really enjoy math as well. My maths weren't stellar, so the technology part is something that I kind of like. I'm scared of. But the like fantasy magic, that sort of thing. So that's where I was. So in terms of like what we were talking about here, probably the ones that I would go back to most. I think Wicked holds up as
you only got one in slot number 3.
In the 3? Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'll do.
Let's stick with your Star Wars extension because I've got my number 3
then
give you.
I'll put that. Yes, I'll put
Now,
Heir to the Empire.
Hold on to the other ideas. So I've got my number 3. So my number 3. I just want to explain first of all why Northern Lights doesn't make my 3, because it is an excellent novel, but I never go back to read it.
Yeah,
I don't particularly like it. I can see that it's brilliant, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
Partly because of the sort of child murder thing going on.
Yeah.
I do love demons and all of that, but I don't like it. So apologies, Philip, you're brilliant, but it's not for me in terms of favorite. He's got plenty of fans, so he doesn't need me. So my number 3, I'm just going to whisk up, is it's an unexpected one. It's Nora Roberts writing as J.D. Robb. And it's called the first part of this very long series. It's still going. It's like part 60 or something now. And the first part is called Naked in Death. And it's a police procedural. So it's like your kind of gritty crime thing, but it's set in around 2050 in New York. And so it's set, Eve Dallas is the main sort of cop in it, who's a very clever but damaged, all the things. It's basically your detective. I love detective stories, and to find a detective story that felt real, projecting into the future, but not so far in the future. And her plots are also very good. She's managed to keep on switching it up, even though we're at part 60 or something. The problem she has is that we're catching up. So she starts this in 1995, and she posits in it a sort of war situation in the 2010s that has changed society. And people are coming out of that in the 2050s. And of course, we've blown through that. So we're in a parallel universe rather than a projected future. But I enjoy them. There's a romance, slightly improbable, super rich husband figure, but okay, fine. All good fun. But I just really enjoy her imagining what a slightly futuristic world would be. And it's police procedural with a twist, with a fantasy twist. So that's something I go back to read with pleasure. Not great literature in that terms, but it's great genre literature. So,
yeah.
And adult, it's very adult. It's not something for kids. So don't give it to your teenager. It's adult material. So that's my number 3. What about your number 2?
I think I would do Northern Lights, Golden Compass. Not because, again, not because I like it necessarily, but because I'm fascinated by it. And by which I mean his, Philip Pullman said it started as kind of initially he wanted to do kind of a retelling of Paradise Lost, and so my academic background, part of my dissertation was looking at was an analysis of Paradise Lost, and mythological influences on Paradise Lost. So I think for me, seeing how he's just so how he's working in different, because unless you know that, you're saying like, okay, here are the different figures from Paradise Lost, and here's what he's kind of working into there. So the world, I'm fascinated by the world that he's created. It's clearly, the flavor of the world isn't something that I love, that I would want to like dip back into and enjoy. And I recognize, I'm able to see, so here's how he's dealing with his own, religious trauma, or political, like these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And so part of me is fascinated and trying to, that I enjoy seeing, okay, so how would is there a way in which this world would be more enjoyable, or I don't know, it doesn't, would it capture my imagination and heart? So it's like mind and heart is the thing for me with some of these, and what makes you come back to it is not just because it's technically well written. It does something that moves you emotionally. But the protagonist, I don't care about Lyra. She's not one that I aspire to, isn't one that I really want to follow and would want to
Oh, you see, I quite like Lyra. For me, she's one of the high spots. I did enjoy. So I just recently read the Book of Dust trilogy. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed the middle part of it. Didn't enjoy the first part, and I found the ending of the third part a bit disappointing. It's kind of fizzled out. But I really, really liked if we think of them as 6 books, that number 5 is my favorite. I loved it.
Right. Yeah.
And it is a lot to do with Lyra and seeing her grow up and develop.
I would love to see more of that then. Yeah. And I did read the Book of Dust first. Yeah. The new
Belle
trilogy.
Sauvage, I think it's called.
Yes. Yes.
I'm struggling with the titles, but the middle one.
The Secret Commonwealth.
Secret
the
Commonwealth.
Second
that's
one.
The one that I really like.
And that's kind of borrowed from Fair. And he introduced it. So there were some things in there he was starting to come introducing with Belle Sauvage that had to do with fairies and different exploring kind of the idea of demons and even daemons, and water, kind of titular spirits of water, or different forces of nature. And so part of that, so seeing some of the potential there. And having the witches and their different relationships with their kind of familiars, with their daemons, those are the things, those are the ideas that are really interesting to me, that I like looking back and seeing how the world building is doing kind of from a writer's perspective, going back to that, and from again the sources, from Paradise Lost mythology, what kind of things is he kind of playing with. And looking those in some ways as okay, so here's how inspiration happens, and here's how it can be put together into a world. How do I want to do this sort of thing with my own world? So I think it's more from a creative, wrestling conversation partner point, that I go back to that and see how he's done it and what I like and what I don't quite like. It's one that I wrestle with.
Yeah, so it's a worthy number 2, and I would say I'd love to study it. It's that book I'd love to study.
Yes.
So much in it, and it's so much depth.
Right.
Still have an enjoyment problem about it. Okay, so my number 2 is I've mentioned already. I just want to do also I would have put in is the Tamora Pierce Immortals quartet, but I'm saving Tamora Pierce for the next decade. But do look that up because it's lovely. But I'm going to put Garth Nix in as number 2, Sabriel. And the reason I'm putting that in is I like the time period that he's chosen. So it's a non-typical fantasy. It feels a bit sort of 1940s, maybe. It's got that sort of mid-20th century feel to the technology in it. But I like the way the magic works. I like the idea of the sort of the runes and also the necromancy with the bells, and it's got a very interesting sort of different flavor to it. And the main character sort of swaps between the books, and it still managed to keep my sort of interest in the different characters and the different parts. So I really like that series. So well done, Garth Nix. That would be my number 2.
Okay. Now, but can I ask you some follow-up questions about that one specifically? So with Sabriel, right? It kind of straddles the line. It's in our world, and like, but it's also but so how so
it's not a portal fantasy. There's a
right. It's not a portal fantasy. Yeah.
There's a world in which there's like an intensely magical part, and then there's a border, and then there's the sort of the world below that, which is more or less normal, but sometimes magic leeches in or invades. Right. So there's a kind of no man's land. It's a bit like, imagine North Korea and South Korea. In fact, the map looks a bit like that. North Korea and South Korea with the no man's land between, with the sort of influence of the North Korean aspect of the northern lands coming into interfering with the southern lands. And Sabriel herself has been raised and educated in the sort of southern part to keep safe, but she has to go and take up her sort of inherited role as the person and to put people to lay the dead, because the idea the dead go through a series of gates on their way to rest, but people can call them back and have sort of armies of the dead or resurrected people who are very dangerous, of course. It's just really, really well imagined. And I just would highly recommend it to anyone who likes fantasy. Look at how he does his magic economy, how it works. Yeah, so just very enjoyable. Yeah,
well, that's great. Yeah, and I think that's the interesting area we're talking about with, again, our last conversation with like Winnie the Pooh, as like there's a a secondary world that's kind of portal fantasy-ish, but what's happening in the portal when the main character, the creator, is not there. So yeah, so there's and whereas with Northern Lights, Golden Compass, it's an alternative, fully
no, it's nothing like that.
Contemporary world.
Yeah, it's more of a zone effect, and maybe it's coming out of because Garth Nix would have grown up as I did under the Cold War with the Iron Curtain. There's definitely a feeling of that, of one set of people living by one rule and another set of people living by another rule. So where fantasy can reflect back on ourselves, you can sort of see the applicability of those sorts of ideas in his world. And it's a YA book as well, so older children and teens can read this with quite happily. Okay, right, number 1. Where are you going to nail your colors to the mast?
Yeah, so for the purposes of revisiting, for being interesting, imaginative, and kind of heartfelt connection, I'd go with in America, this Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Okay, I've got it here as well as my number 1, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Yeah.
Yes.
Why have you picked this? I have particular reasons why I've picked it.
I think it's again, like if we're looking at things that ignite imagination, it's the idea of, right, kind of like a hidden world, a world that exists kind of behind our own. There's this the potential for magic around any corner, right? That you in your world imagine, oh, did I just see, was that a bird, or was it actually an owl that I saw that was carrying something somewhere, right? So it's this way that the world that you see it isn't exactly how it is, that it's more magical than it might appear. And so there's this, I hope for the fantastic, the wonderful, and I want to see more wonder in the world. And so this is a story that essentially, says like, well, what if there was actually, the world is more full of wonders than you can imagine, but also along with that, with greater dangers, right, as well. So for me, yeah, and it's also heartfelt, right, with the characters, the relationships, the character dynamics. are nice. It's not, at least in that first book, it's not, the peril isn't, it's not a nail biter. It's one where the peril, it's a middle grade book. And it's a world that's rich enough that you can see the deeper, more weightier, moral, ethical themes that are there kind of implicit in that world that then can be teased out later as the characters get older and start to ask those sorts of questions. So in terms of the audience, the ideas that exploring in that rich world, appropriate for a middle grade, for people who at that point of their life who are asking those sorts of questions, looking for themselves, right? Who probably every child feels that they are the one that's neglected, that isn't being taken seriously, that, and the odds are stacked against them. Every adolescent, everybody who's starting to grow into this world of adults, kind of, I'd imagine, at least a lot of my friends feel that way. And so to have this kind of nobody character who's turns out to be something that's actually very special, and the world is bigger and more beautiful and wondrous than it appears, and that you actually belong in this other world, that's something that is hopeful, and I think heartening for a lot of folks. So those for me.
Yeah, well said. And I agree with lots of that. And also, just going back to the time of life when I read these books, these were the books that were the rock star books when my kids were growing up. And they're caught up in my mind with all the best moments of peak bookshop, going to midnight openings and the excitement of the story, that idea of story having such a power, that people would queue up and drink hot chocolate and have owls in the bookshop. I mean, it was just so marvelous. We really, really enjoyed it as a family. And sort of separating the more sort of controversial parts of J.K. Rowling since, which has divided opinion in our household about her. But going back to that original innocence, we all really loved them and enjoyed them and found them. They're not. The funny thing about them is that, in a way, they're not original, because there's so many elements that it's almost as if they were always written or always existed, because she's picked up so many ideas which you kind of know, but yet you think, oh yes, of course this is how it works. And maybe that's the ultimate in art, that it seems so sort of, well, of course it's this. It's almost seamless, that idea of, yes, there's a magic school, and yes, they do this, and this is how they intersect with our life. So I agree with you. I think in terms of the pleasure it's given our family, we went to see the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child when it didn't particularly like that, but we still went and saw it, and we saw the films, and I've been listening to the audiobooks. I go back to it and still find things to enjoy, and it does reflect, because I think J.K. Rowling had a similar schooling experience to me. You can see your own teachers in these ones that she's made into magicians. So there's a sort of comedy level which I enjoy, of thinking about, just the way teachers behave and the strange sort of little micro cultures you get in schools. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a very, very good book, and will stay a classic for a long while, I think. So yeah, it is the standout book of the 1990s. Maybe not the best written, but that's not what we're judging by. We're judging by what we go back to and enjoy. Yeah. So yeah, so just to go back through our top three, mine were the J.D. Robb series, In Death. There's lots of them, but it starts with Naked in Death. Then it was Sabriel by Garth, and then it was at top of the tree was J.K. Rowling. And you were number three was
Heir to the Empire, Timothy Zahn, for pure Star Wars nostalgia purposes. Yeah. And two was Northern Lights, Golden Compass, Philip Pullman, and first for me also was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which was shamefully retitled as the Sorcerer's Stone in the US.
Yeah. So I'd be very interested to find out from anyone listening if they have a very different lineup of three. I feel as though because there's only so many books only one person can read, there's going to be some really obvious things we've missed out. So do tell us, because part of the reason for doing this is to point people to new fantasy reads.
Mm-hmm.
And do join us again as we tackle the 1980s. So I'm going to do my research about, what came out then and find some good reads to throw at you, Jacob.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers Podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.